Hey Rogers, I am the director of the Forerunner, and this is the second video I've done since June 24th. This is an article that I published on June 24th. I did an earlier video in which I covered the second part of this article. It's called America as a Model of Liberty. And what I want to talk about right now is a very important event in the history of the world called the Dobbs decision. Everybody knows about Roe v. Wade, but the Dobbs decision is the reversal of Roe v. Wade. And what a lot of people don't realize is that Roe v. Wade and the reversal of Roe v. Wade represents the kind of like the beginning of the United States assertion as a liberal democracy in the world, and then the end of America's role as a liberal democracy in the world. And you might be wondering, like, well, how are those two things related? To understand this, I want to bring us back to this idea of liberty. Okay, and so in the 1800s, I collect history books from the 1800s, and two of my most popular authors that I like are Charles Coffin and Charles Bancroft. I have multiple books by Charles Coffin. Another one is John Fiske, who's very good. In the 1800s, there was this idea of progress, not just any type of progress, but Christian progress, that Christianity was the leavening force in the world, and that the reason why history was improving, that society was improving, was because of a Christian influence in America, and then that Christian influence would influence the nations. Now, what happened in the late 1800s is America also began to shift from being a Christian civilization state, where like the original 13 colonies, most of them were founded with a very self-conscious Christian covenant, some type of a constitution or a charter or a compact of some type, like the Fundamental Orders of the Commonwealth of Connecticut is one, where it's very clearly laid out that the colony was founded on the basis of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and for the purpose of converting the natives, and also to advancing the kingdom of God in the whole world. That was the idea. And then by the time of the Declaration of Independence, you start having like these Enlightenment ideas that came in from Europe, Montesquieu, Rousseau, John Locke, but just as much by Scottish Presbyterian philosophers as well. So there was still like, even like John Locke's parents were Puritans, so there was still like this Puritan idea of Christianity leavening the whole world, like a post-millennial worldview in which the world was going to become Christian and then Christ would return after that. So I am a post-millennialist and also a neo-Puritan. But then toward the end of the 19th century, the 1800s, you started getting more of a secular viewpoint, and we shifted away from a Christian view of progress to a secular humanist, or what I would call an egalitarian humanist view of progress. So it was essentially like Christianity, but ripped from its original intent. I have an interesting article on this that I did years and years ago, and most of the ideas I've been coming to lately are just extensions of ideas I had a long time ago. But now that I'm actually seeing some of these events that I thought would happen in the world, there's some little missing pieces that I'm starting to see that I didn't see before. So I did this article called Pioneers, Settlers, and Aristocrats. I just wanted to go over that. There's one key element of that article that I think is important. If I can find it real quick. This was back in the early. This says 1993, which is when I published this. And so the idea is that the first generation of Americans were pioneers. They were Protestant Christians who came to the world during the time when the Reformation was still going on in Europe. It was very much in progress. And then you had settlers, and then you have aristocrats. Okay. And what I mentioned in this article is that secular egalitarianism is based on individualism, materialism, and competition. Competition or capitalism. Capitalism isn't bad, but what happened was, in the time of the pioneers that came to America, people believed very strongly in the idea of individuality. Okay, so the drives of individualism, materialism, and competition began to replace the idea that individuals were to work towards God's reward and wealth, and that wealth was only to be had as a blessing by Christians who were but stewards, part-time owners of God's material blessings. So in the beginning, like when the Puritans came to settle New England, they cleared the forest, they farmed the land, they worked 6 days a week, sunrise to sunset. They kept the Sabbath because they were looking for God's blessing. They weren't necessarily looking to store up wealth, but they were looking for God's reward and eternal life. And a byproduct of that was the blessing of wealth. Okay? So individualism is distinct from individuality. In other words, every person is an individual before God, a priest before God, and needs to be the shepherd of their own soul. All right? Materialism replaced the work ethic, and then competition, competition like the drive to capitalism for the sake of making more capital, as distinct from free enterprise. Like, we're free in the world to be creative as individuals, to glorify God. So the former, what we have today, is birthed from selfish motives, and the latter are descriptive of an individual's God-given character and giftings. The spirit who gave life to these godly principles of the early pilgrims had departed, and these distinctly American characteristics now existed as merely an empty shell. All right, and so we've had different patterns of this throughout American history. During the Great Awakenings, we kind of recovered some of that neo-Puritan. We recovered a Puritan ethic about the work ethic and so on, and that in each one of the awakenings, what happens is that the moral consensus breaks down, the traditions of established institutions such as the home, the church, and school is rejected, and then the credibility of legitimate leadership is questioned. And then when everything breaks down, the only thing that can really solve it is a spiritual awakening. So that's basically what we're in today. Right now we're and we've been in that for a long time. We've been in that for at least that breakdown. I don't want to give a number of years, but for most of my lifetime, we've been in that breakdown where things are getting, seems like they're getting worse and worse. But in fact, what we're seeing is that we're being readied for a great awakening. So I've always believed that. But what I want to point out is that, let's see, I've got to launch my article again. These are two quotes from, I told you, George Bancroft and also Fisk. Excuse me, not Fisk, but John Fisk is the other one that's very good. John Fisk and George Bancroft were both Unitarians. They represent the empty shell, in a sense. Most of what they're saying is right, but, so in other words, like, they're descended from that Puritan idea, but it's kind of like God is out there, God is providential, but progress is a force of its own. So this is what Charles Bancroft said. Our fathers cleared the ground and laid the foundation upon the living rock, which is to say human rights. So originally it would be the living rock is who? It's Jesus Christ, right? But now, as we began to shift in 1879 towards this what I call nation-statism, it's like the secular religion of America is nation-statism or egalitarianism. All right, we shifted toward human rights as the source of our liberty, rather than God as the source of our liberty. We begin to see that time, thought, and experience have not been wrought in vain, that progress is not a phantom of the imagination, that the human race is essentially a unit that has been growing through all the centuries and is now approaching the prime of its manhood, just ready to enter it on its special career with the grandest work still to do. So it sounds a lot like postmillennialism, but postmillennialism without a relationship with Jesus Christ. More like, this is just going to happen. The energies of all races are now preparing for unheard of achievements. The world has never been so completely and wisely busy as now. And America stands between modern Europe and ancient Asia, receiving from and giving to both. Her institutions are founded on principles so just and so human that when administered with due wisdom and skill, they will embarrass and restrain the proper activities of man at no point. You have to remember, this is when electricity was being not invented, but electrical appliances were being invented. People were discovering, the steamboat was taking people all over the world. It's like an incredible time period in American history. America stands as a model which all other nations will carefully copy in due time, as they can adapt themselves and change their institutions. There may be no literal copy or close formal imitation, but there is little doubt that the spirit and true sense of our Declaration of Independence will finally mold the structure and control the working of all governments. And I agree with this. I think America is exceptional. And I think that, we have done a lot of great good in the world, and that freedom in the world is largely due to the American experiment. The one thing that I feel, this is the one place where we went off, is that, our source is human rights, or our source is nature, or our source is civil government that gives us those rights. No, our source is Christ. Okay. Now, Charles Coffin was an evangelical Christian, and he wrote around the same time as Charles Bancroft. George Bancroft, someone else, but Charles Coffin and Charles Bancroft, they both wrote around the same time. But Charles Coffin, they both lived in Boston, and they were both historians, and Coffin's view is a little bit more explicitly Puritan and Christian. John Fiske as well, although John Fiske was also a Unitarian, but he was more explicitly more like the Puritans. I have spoken of the meaning of history. Surely it has a meaning. What else are we living for? There must be some ultimate end to be accomplished. You will see how tyranny and wrong have fought against liberty and justice, how tyranny and wrong have gone down before it. Men die, generations come and go, but ideas live on. Through the narratives of wars, massacres, and bloodshed, you will see right, justice, and liberty ever advancing. The human race is marching toward a state of society expressibly grand and glorious. So it's basically saying the same thing, but one of them is explicitly Christian, and the other one is more like just, this is the energy of all the human race working together. So one of them is more man-centered. It's very important to understand, because liberal democracy is a lie. Liberal democracy is not how our country was founded. Our country was founded on basically as an extension of the European Christian civilization, especially the Anglo-Saxon Protestant Christian view. Okay, and I'll be getting into that in further videos, what that's all about. But this is more of an overview talking about the family. All right. And this is where we have to start. The Christian family is the future of humanity. The Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade on June 24, 2002 is consistent with the tectonic shift away from modernist nation states based on politics and the world banking system, to civilization states based on deeply shared cultural values that have sustained the social order over many centuries. So liberal democracy is a system, it's a modernist system of politics. Civilization states are based on cultural values that are centuries old. It's religion, it's language, it's stories, common traditions, common histories, and so on. All right, now how is that related to abortion? Consider for a moment the Dobbs decision and the furor surrounding the leak and the subsequent release of Samuel Alito's majority opinion. Consider the abortion advocates' anger over the end of their sole authority for their abortion rights. Georg Hegel said the state is God walking on earth. That's the source of the abortion rights, is the state. It's the civil government. It's this idea of human rights. That's the source of their abortion rights, is the idea of that women have rights, they have the right to do what they want to do with their own body, they have the right to privacy, and so on. Okay? Think about it. If abortion is a right guaranteed by Roe as the law of the land, what happens now that the decision is overturned? By what authority is that right claimed? If it's by the authority of the court, then what happens when the majority rules that no such constitutional right exists? What then? By what authority do they insist on this? Okay, that's the big question we need to ask about everything ethical. By what authority do we say something is right or wrong? All the pro-aborts have right now is anger and rage. This is called postmodernism. It's thought based on pure emotion. There's no logic or rationale behind it. It's just an urge. It's an urge really against God and toward our own self-debasement, our own self-destruction. To argue with a pro-abortion advocate is a waste of time. By their standards, they're wrong, but they don't know they're wrong. Their faith in an enshrined right to kill a preborn person in the name of choice only needs to be consigned to a byword of a darker past. In other words, consigned onto the ash heap of history, as the communists used to say. The only thing they have left is their faith in that dark world order, that world order based on rights that has no loving God that bestow us with those rights. So right now their faith has been broken, and that is why they're hysterical. So you're going to see more hysteria as time goes on with this too. It's not just kind of beginning. And I call this the death rattle of egalitarian humanism. It's like people are hysterical. They don't know what they're hysterical about, and it looks like that they're winning because they're rioting. They elected Joe Biden and so on. But really, this is all just an unthinking, unplanned mess that they're involved with. And why do they believe this? Well, the collectivist interpretation of truth, that is, cultural or group awareness, understands reality as a social conflict, is not only self-defeating, it is death itself. It's an oppressive, totalitarian, murderous ideology that explicitly states that anyone who does not convert to the mandates of the ministry of truth is either subjugated or killed. That's the end of result. That is the end of result of collectivism. So to get the idea of what the collectivist interpretation of truth is, basically Hegel and then Marx and other Hegelian philosophers said that truth is by consensus. You have a thesis that people believe is true, but then as history progresses, you have an antithesis, which pulls the thesis more toward the middle. Like, in other words, you have all life is sacred, life in the womb is sacred. No, but women have rights. That's the antithesis. And we pull it into the middle where you have Roe v. Wade, which says that women have a right to choose if she's a victim of rape, if she's a victim of incest, if it's in the first trimester, if there's a fetal anomaly, if there's a danger to the life of the woman, if there's a danger to the health of the woman, if there's a danger to her mental health, if it causes her to have a bad hair day, and so on. And pretty soon, right, anyone that doesn't convert to this idea that a woman has a right to abortion is targeted, and they're threatened with death. That's the end result of that. You have life on one side and you have death on the other. The devil doesn't come and immediately try to convert people to death, but it's thesis versus antithesis, and you're drawn into the middle. And finally, it gets more and more ludicrous and absurd. It's truth by consensus. It's, you invent your own truth. And so Western neoliberals and neoconservatives, right? These are the twin cousins of collectivism. Basically are hell-bent on this campaign of death and destruction. They don't know it, but anyone who enforces liberal democracy or this idea of egalitarian liberalism, that is the world that they eventually are going to create, okay? We're currently sending tens of billions of dollars to Ukraine each month to ensure that Eastern Europe stays in the clutches of the globalists who would enforce liberal democracy and the conservative deep cultures throughout the world. Their agenda includes imposing on all nations abortion rights, homosexual rights, transaction rights, rights, all these rights that ultimately end up with death. Right as they're punishing nations for not implementing homosexual and transgender. Transsexual is no longer politically correct. I have to say transgender, non-binary rights, and so on. It's also politically incorrect to say homosexual. You have to say gay, lesbian, transsexual, bisexual, all that kind of stuff. But If you don't say all those things, then you're in trouble. Okay? And what are Christians doing to react? How are Christians reacting to this? All right. We ought to be rallying around not just a vision for an abortion-free America, but a civil order that recognizes we are a republic based on Christian liberty. We are not a world empire. America should be a model of Christian liberty, a city set on a hill, a shining light for all the world to see, as our founders preached, not an arsenal for democracy to wage war on Russia and China, as Joe Biden wrongly preaches. So our leaders want death, and what we need to preach is life. All right, so the move to a multipolar world is a part of that. There's going to be other countries that are not Christian, like China, India, so on, that people in other countries that aren't perfectly Christian, like evangelicals might not like a Russian Orthodox world or a Catholic world, or some Protestants might not like a Pentecostal world, but these are the world orders that are coming. They're civilizational states based on the culture, the religious culture, the language, the traditions, and so on of the people. And so this move to a multipolar world is a natural outworking of God's destiny for the nations. All right, and so I want to talk about in this video, I have a lot of things I'm going to start getting into. But the first thing I want to talk about is a moral foundation for the family. Okay. The Declaration of the Large Family and Future of Humanity. 8 years ago, unnoticed by most, there was a document that was signed in Moscow by representatives from pro-life and pro-family organizations all over the world. This document, I believe, is no less significant than the United States Declaration of Independence in 1776. When the Declaration of Independence, by the way, was signed, it was not really that big of a deal. Like, people didn't, they thought even Thomas Jefferson didn't think the Declaration of Independence was his greatest work. He had other documents that he wrote. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that, but I'm saying in the future, this document, the Declaration of the Large Family and the Future of Humanity, might be read as this was the shot heard around the world. Okay? So these principles were the principles themselves to rescue many nations from tyranny and injustice by mapping out an agenda to restore the biblical family. So you can read this from 2014 for a better understanding of the multipolar world of civilization states based on the traditional family. And this is the original link. And this will bring you to the longer document. Okay, I've done a little shorter version of it right here. And these are the main points. These points describe well the difference between the power of cultural civilization built on faith and family and the failed neoliberal globalist system of nation states built on political, economic, and military coercion. All right, so this is the idea is that liberal democracy is as bad or worse than atheistic communism and racist fascism. It's basically its twin cousin. We're not talking about the idea of our founders, but we're talking about an idea that was introduced into America at the time of the founding, but really didn't get traction until the late 1800s. After World War II, America became more of a world empire. We became the world superpower along with the Soviet Union. And then after 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, America has become this force to try to impose liberal democracy on the world. And with that has come the imposition of, abortion, perversion, and so on, pornography, materialism, all right, so on. So this deals specifically with the family, how to preserve the family and how to preserve humanity. The preservation of mankind is based on a system of family and kindred ties that are formed through the bonds of marriage between a male and a female and the children born to them. This is, and only this alone, is capable of ensuring the reproduction, stability, and continuity of human civilization. All other kinds of sexual relationships or alliances intentionally that exclude the birth of children are meaningless, for they are devoid of the notion set down in the very definition of the word family, and no political or economic interest can serve as a pretext for replacing the true and time-tested concept of family by any type of surrogate. We regretfully declare that the systemic policy pursued by the ruling elite in the developed countries of the world in order to implement the theory of the best postmodern society, in essence a society of unrestrained consumerism, a policy of creating a society of individuals who are absolutely unconcerned about the future and who are focused only on satisfying their selfish desires of the moment. Actually, such a society is ultimately aimed at destroying faith in God as well as belief in good. These postmodern policies focused on the material wealth are destroying what is human and the human being as created by God, at wrecking the spiritual dimension of man, all of which are his distinguishing features in living nature. We appeal to all people who acknowledge the significance and values of the natural family for preserving human civilization. Okay, so here are the points or the purposes. To unite before the threat of dehumanization of society and set up a barrier on the road of ideology lines, state-supported interference in the private lives of people, in an attempt to force specific sexual lifestyles and preferences of the minority upon the majority. That's number one. Number two, to strive to set forth legislative initiatives in the laws and constitutions of all countries that clearly define the naturally predetermined relationships in the family as relationships between male and female, their children, and their relatives. Number three, to advocate and support the natural family as the sole source of preserving civilization, the life of mankind. Number four, to make use of all thematic international days, protection of of children, of family, etc., whose slogans and mottos refer to traditional values, for demonstrating their disagreement with and dissent for state-supported destructive tendencies in the sex and family life, especially the young people, and consolidating the understanding of a natural family as the foundation of human life at the level of the individual, society, state, and individual, and civilization. Okay, notice that progression is the individual first, the immediate culture, which would be the church, the business world, and so on, the state, which is the civil government, and then the larger state, which is the civilization. All right, so let me say, I want to pause here and say something about this. In Florida, and I know throughout America, we have gay days. Like there were gay days at Disney. I live about 3 miles from Disney, actually. And, we have been inundated with this since the 1990s, just rainbow flags and so on. What we need to do as Christians is, during Rainbow Month, we need to say, today is Protection of Children Day. Today is Family Day, and so on. And we need to, have our own flags, our own slogans, and our own mottos that pull people back to traditional values, okay? And they have their own propaganda, and we need to stand in dissent of that and begin to promote our own worldview not through coercion like they try to do, but just through persuasion, and to try to show people the light versus the darkness. Number 5, to oppose cynical utilization of women as surrogate mothers in interests of same-gender liaisons and alliances. Number 6, to uphold the interests of children and work for the adoption of legislative bans on all types of propaganda concerning homosexual relationships and the environment of children and juveniles. By the way, Russia and Hungary has done this, and to a lesser extent, Poland and several other countries are beginning to say that we're going to oppose Western propaganda trying to homosexualize and sexualize young children. Number 7, to initiate and support scientific research to study the conditions and prospects of developing a natural family, as well as studying the negative social and psychological effects of raising children in same-gender couples. Number 8, to support the public efforts aimed at ensuring integrity of human life from the moment of conception to natural death, to protect children from influences taken against their individuality, and to uphold child rearing rights of parents, both for the fathers and mothers. That's a little bit of the fathers and mothers' rights, I should say. Number 9, to demand initiatives and directives from the governments and heads of state to ensure protection of the natural family, childhood, and motherhood in both domestic and foreign policies. This is something that should be read at city council meetings, county commission meetings. It should be presented to our state legislatures and so on. as a declaration, and this should be spread all the way around the world. One thing, if you go back and read the original, this is a slightly edited, shortened version, but the original kind of relies a little bit on the United Nations Charter as a vehicle by which these rights might be implemented. I think that that's a contradiction. I think that it's not the United Nations role to do this; it's local government. But that's just me. But the principles themselves are excellent. These are very, very good principles. And what's most interesting to me is the time and place. It was Moscow, September 11th, 2014. Not only the anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, but just a few months after the Euromaidan coup in Kiev that advocated anti-family, pro-prostitution, pro-abortion policies in otherwise conservative Ukraine. Like the Ukrainian nationalists are not, these evil Western Nazis that want to, most of them are very pro-family, pro-morality, and so on. But they're fierce nationalists. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as you don't bring racism into it and hate people like the Nazis did. Nationalism is not a bad thing. It has a good, the idea of the nation being, based on the family and so on is a good thing. So anyway, the document serves as a declaration of independence from Western liberal elitism, which is what Ukraine needs, it's what Russia needs, it's what America needs, it's what the whole world needs. So thank God that that's collapsing. Let's look at Russia as an example. Russia has gone from a peak of over 5 million abortions per year to 0.6 million. 500,000 is still too many, but imagine 5 million abortions to 0.6 million. That's a per capita drop of over 90%. Okay? Because, right, think of that. Per capita drop of 90%. In Russia, not only is gay marriage illegal, but even homosexual propaganda is outlawed. The Russian economy in the past 30 years has been the fastest growing market economy in the world. This is still a poor country with many problems, but there has been a Christian revival in Russia, Ukraine, and all of the Soviet republics in the past 30 years. Russia has by far more evangelicals than any country in Europe. The second largest evangelical church by far in Europe is in Kiev. It's called the Embassy of God. And Ukraine has more evangelical Christians per capita than any other country in Europe. And I also should mention the Russian Orthodox Church has grown tremendously since the time of 1991, when about 40% of the country claimed to be baptized, and now over 70% of the country claims to be Christian of some type. So that's a significant shift. All right. So this is what I would say. How does this relate to the war in Russia and Ukraine? I don't think that we need to take sides between Russia and Ukraine, except to call for the end of conflict as soon as possible. But for people that are really rooting for NATO and Ukraine, you have to ask yourself, if you're a Christian, do you want Ukraine to be governed by a corrupt, humanist, Western-style liberal democracy? Or would we rather see Ukraine maintain its heritage, is a little grammatical. Okay, sorry about that. Would we rather see Ukraine maintain its heritage as the birthplace of the Christian Eastern Slavic people, or Kievan Rus, and the birthplace of the Russian Orthodox Church established in AD 988 by Vladimir I? And by the way, when Russian leaders say that, this is one people, it doesn't mean that they don't want Ukraine to exist. They're not talking about a nation state or a political system. What they're talking about is one culture, one people, a civilization state based on Christian morals, Christian traditions, and so on. Okay, so the last thing I want to leave you with is I'm going to get into Alexander Dugin next in my next few videos, which is very exciting. I'm finally getting to that, but this is a very, very, I'm going to put a link to this below, but this woman right here, Giorgia Meloni, she will almost certainly be the next prime minister of Italy after the snap elections in November. All right, I call her the JL to the EU globalist Cicera. And when she gets elected in September, that will be the end of the European Union, because they will likely withdraw from the European Union, and it will also be the end of the relevancy of the NATO alliance. I'm not joking about this. This is a huge thing that's coming. what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you this link right here. This is to this is one of my favorite. Let me just play a little bit of this to you.
Grazie a Jacopo Goghe, vicepresidente del 13° Congresso Mondiale delle Famiglie. Adesso
Actually, this is quite long. I'm going to give you the link, but I want to show you how she ends. I want to show you how she ends this this speech. This is not her, but this is she's a candidate for Prime Minister of Italy. All right. And I'm just going to play you the end of this speech because it's very dramatic how she ends. All right. And she talks about all of the... Okay.
Identità religiosa, è sotto attacco l'identità di genere, è sotto attacco l'identità familiare. Non devo potermi definire italiana, cristiana, donna, madre, no? Io devo essere cittadino X, genere X, genitore 1, genitore 2, devo essere un numero. Perché quando sarò solamente un numero, quando non avrò più un'identità, quando non avrò più radici, beh, allora sarò lo schiavo perfetto in balia della grande speculazione finanziaria, il consumatore perfetto. E questa è la ragione per la quale oggi noi facciamo tanta paura. Questa è la ragione per la quale oggi questo appuntamento fa tanta paura. Perché noi non vogliamo essere dei numeri, noi siamo qui per dire che noi non siamo dei numeri, noi difenderemo il valore della persona umana, di ogni singola persona umana, perché ognuno di noi ha un codice genetico unico e irripetibile. E questo, piaccia o no, ha del sacro. Lo difenderemo Dio, la patria e la famiglia, che fanno tanto schifo a qualcuno. Lo faremo per difendere la nostra libertà, perché noi non saremo mai schiavi e semplici consumatori in balia della speculazione finanziaria. Ecco la nostra missione, ecco perché oggi sono venuta qui. Scriveva Chesterton ormai più di un secolo fa, vediamo se ve lo trovo. Fuochi verranno attizzati per dimostrare che 2 più 2 fa 4. Spade verranno sguainate per dimostrare che le foglie sono verdi in estate. Quel tempo è arrivato, signori. Siamo pronti. Grazie.
So this is a very similar meeting, World Congress of Families, number 8, and it's very similar to the thing that happened in Moscow back in where is it right here? So this is happening all over the world. You're going to start to see this even in countries that are considered to be very liberal, like Spain and Portugal and France. There's another woman. Well, it might not happen overnight, but you're going to start to see this more and more countries. First going to, this is basically Christian nativism is what she's going back to, but out of Christian nativism can come true revival. All right. The answer is not just to elect a president or a prime minister. The answer is to really restore the culture. And to restore the culture, we do need revival and great awakening. But that's what's coming. And you're going to start to see this in more and more countries throughout the world, in countries that you would never imagine electing very conservative Christian leaders. And that's really going to provoke the United States, because the United States is supposed to be the leader. We're supposed to be the model of liberty. Okay, so are we ready for that? Are we ready to become a model once again? Okay, so if you like this, please like and subscribe to the video, because that helps the algorithm get us, better. It helps more people to see it. Basically, if you liked what you saw, make sure you like and subscribe. That will help the algorithm point this video to more people, point more people to the video. And if you really like us, you can always donate too. All right, I will see you soon, and I'm going to start talking more about multipolar theories, beginning with Alexander Dugin and several other authors I've been reading.